Hello everyone, my name is Rodrigo. We are going to learn in this session about APA style table formatting. APA stands for American Psychological Association. They publish their publication manual. This is the publication manual of the American Psychological Association. That's the reference. We do have this book in the library. I got a copy from the library in Coleraine to prepare this talk. So the last edition is the seventh, published in 2020. Within this edition, there is a chapter 7. Chapter 7 is about tables and figures. The sections specifically about tables are from 7.8 to 7.21. They are located between pages 199 and 224. Just a general introduction before we talk about editing tables. Some important information. All tables need to be called in the text. So there can be no table in your manuscript that you don't refer to in your text. All tables need to be called in the text. That's called call out. Okay. To call out a table, you need to refer to the table using the table number. And in doing so, you have to capitalize the letter T in table. So every time you refer to a numbered table in your manuscript, which you have to do at some point in the text, you have to write table with a capital T and the number of the table. The numbering of the tables depends on the order of callout. So you number the tables according to callout order. Now, this is usually better to do at the end after you've finished writing and editing everything you had to, because as you are writing, tables are gonna, at some point, they're probably gonna change positions. You might remember that you had to put a table before one that you already had there. So in order not to have any confusion regarding order of callout and table numbering, I would personally prefer to leave numbering to the end. So you can use a personal tag and just after you've finished writing everything, you just change your tag to the numbers according to callout number. Also, in Word, if you're using Microsoft Word, there is an option called References. There's a tab called References. Funny enough, that's not about bibliographical references. It's actually about internal references in your text, in your document. And there is a cross-reference option that you can use to help you with this numbering, because then you can just update the whole document and all numbers are changed according to callout order. We are going to see that later on when we focus on how to edit tables in Microsoft Word. Now we are just talking general information about how APA requires you to do that. So tables need to be necessary, and the information in the tables doesn't need to be repeated in the text. Why do tables need to be necessary? Because you shouldn't just create tables if you don't need them. Usually, you create a table because you have systematically repeated type of information in your text that instead of just repeating the same thing over and over again in the text, it just reads better to give your reader a table that summarizes this system of information. So, for example, um, say you have four variables, and all these four variables are going to have descriptive statistics. Say they are continuous quantitative variables. So they can have means and standard deviations, for example. But say you also want minimums and maximums or whatever, instead of just repeating over and over in the text something like, for variable one, we have that mean and that standard deviation and this minimum and that maximum. And then for variable two, we have this mean and this standard deviation and this minimum and that maximum, and so on for all your variables. Obviously, it reads better to not do that in your text and instead write a table where this information is systematized. So you can have, for example, in your first column, the names of the variables, and in your headings, mean, standard deviation, minimum, and maximum. And then you can have the same information in just one place. It just reads better. If you have that information in your table, you do not need to repeat that again in the text. That was the purpose of creating the table in the first place, wasn't it? So you don't have to repeat all the information again in the text. Of course, your text needs to have some dialogue with the table, and that is why we have to call out the tables in the text. So we have to discuss something about the table in the text, but we don't need to keep repeating the information in the text if it's already in the table, okay? Also, APA requires tables to be somehow understandable in isolation. So if someone is walking down the street and they come across your table, they need to be able to understand all the information that is in that table, regardless of the rest of your text in your manuscript. Um, Now, obviously, at the same time, your text needs to have some dialogue with that table. So obviously, your text is going to have information that is needed for full understanding of the table, but you need to prepare your table with its title and its notes in a way that people can understand the table in isolation. That's just a guide for how to think about how to format your table. Now, placement. Where do we place the tables? There are two options. One is what we usually do when we are writing coursework. We embed the tables within the text after its first call out, right? That's what we tend to do because it just makes more sense that if we are talking about table one, for example, right now in the text, it just makes sense to have table one right after the paragraph where I am talking about table one, right? But it's not always the case that this is the requirement. There is a second option of how to place the tables, and that option usually is required for publication in peer-reviewed journals because it's easier for copy editing. You place all tables and figures on separate pages after the reference list. Okay, so that's all gonna go to the end. Your reference list goes after the whole text, and then after the reference list, you have each table in one page, right? So obviously, if a table takes more than a page, you are going to start a new page after the table is finished to start the next table. Okay, all tables start in a new page of their own. After the tables are put this way, the figures come and they're also placed that way. This session is not about figures, but a lot of the things I'm talking about here also apply to figures. For example, figures also need to have a capital letter when they are called out, and they need to be called in the text as well, and they're also numbered according to call out order. In that placement option also they come after tables, and they're also placed one per each new page. Okay, this is just a skeleton, a general skeleton of a table. We are going to talk about some components, some elements that all tables need to have. All tables need to start with a table number, and that's in bold. Okay, then one double-spaced line after that in a new line, you put the title of the table in italics. Um, the title of the table needs to have enough information so people walking down the street and coming across your table isolatedly can understand what the table is about. But at the same time, it should not be too detailed. It should not include too much information. It needs to work as a title. So it needs to be informative enough, just enough. The actual body of the table includes the headings, which is the first line or first lines, depending on how you organize your headings. Then the numeric information that you have in your table in each cell. Okay. So what borders of the body of the table do we mark with lines? We always have to mark the very first border, the top border with a line, and the very bottom, the last uh, line of the last border of all in the table needs to be marked with a line. And below the headings, separating the headings from the rest of the body of the table, you need to mark that line. So these three lines that you can see on this slide are the three lines you have to have in your table. Also, there are lines that you can never, there are borders that you can never mark with a line. So the leftmost side of the table is never marked with a line, and the rightmost side of the table is never marked with a line. That means that tables should always be open at the sides. You never close the tables with lines on each side. That's APA style. You might come across articles out there that have tables with these lines at the end, at the two sides, but that's not APA style. That's that journal's style, but not APA style. Right, let's see again some of these elements. That's the number of the table. It needs to go in bold on top. Then you break a line with a double-spaced lining space, and then you put the title in italics, and then the actual body of the table has rows and columns. Each combination, each intersection of a row with the column is called a cell. These cells, in the body of the table, they can have any spacing. You have three options: single spaced, 1.5 spaced, or double spaced. You have the option because usually tables have a lot of information. That's their purpose, and they can be too big. So if you keep a double space, it can just be difficult to read and understand what is the structure of the table. So you have the option of having smaller line spaces in the body of the table. Also, you can have notes. Notes are optional. If you do use notes, sometimes they're required. We're going to talk about situations where you are required to use notes, but this is usually how notes are written down at the bottom of the table. First, you have a general note. It starts with the word note in italics, full stop, you start the explanation. This is a general note for the whole table. You don't have more than one general note because it's about the whole table. If you have one table, you can only have at most one general note for that table. Then you break a line if you need specific notes. Specific notes are marked with lowercase letters in superscript, okay? So you can have A, B, C, and so on. These specific notes go in the same paragraph. That means you don't break a line. You don't start a new line for a new specific note. In this example, we only have A. If we had B, we would start B in here right after A. You don't break a line. Then you have the probability notes. The same principle applies where you don't break a new line for a new probability note. They go all in the same row. Probability notes are marked by asterisks. These asterisks need to be superscript. Okay, sometimes we write asterisks and we think they are already superscript, but they are not. We need to put them in superscript mode. In APA style, you have to do that. Um, so usually a P value smaller than 0.05 is indicated by one single asterisk. A p-value smaller than 0.01 is indicated by two asterisks, and a p-value smaller than 0.001 is indicated by three asterisks. Okay? In APA, you never use the zero before the dot. You only show the decimal cases. You don't need to show the zero before that. That's why a p-value always starts with the zero, unless it's a probability of 100% in some case. So in that case, you just have a 1. P is equal to 1, okay? In all other cases, P is some number below 1 until never really 0. P is only equal to 0 asymptotically in the limit, but it's never empirically equal to 0. Technically, according to statistics, nothing is impossible. Isn't that beautiful? But anyway, so again, these asterisks have to be superscript and they do not have any spaces. So in the cells, after you put some value and you want to refer to the p-value of that number, you don't put any spaces. You just place the asterisks right after the number. And then in your note, you also don't put any spaces after the asterisk before the p. After the asterisks in the p in the probability notes, you write the p's right after the asterisks with no spaces. The p's are always in italics, always in APA style. P values are always in italics. You don't put the zero before the decimals. And usually you are encouraged to show the exact p-values unless they are smaller than 0.001. If they're smaller than 0.001, APA style requires you to just say that p is smaller than 0.001. But if it's bigger, you are encouraged to show the exact p-value. Now, when we are doing that in a table, using these asterisks, what we are trying to do is exactly to not show the exact p-values because you have a reason to do so in this particular table. It's probably because your table already has so much information and it's already so big that it just makes the information not easy to find if you give the exact p-values for all these cells. You want to make things simpler to your reader, you use the asterisks just to show which p-values are significant to what level, okay? But if your table is small enough and simple enough, you are encouraged to show the exact p-value. This is an example taken from the official APA style blog, apastyle.apa.org. I'm pretty sure that's the name of the blog. That's the official blog um, based on the publication manual of the American Psychological Association. This example is in there, so some of the elements I showed you before are here. Table number in bold, table title in italics, double spaced. Um, the lines that you have to have the bottom line, the top line, and the line below the headings. In this case, the headings are double decked, so they are decked heads. That happens when you have the same information for different um, columns. So here in this example, you have girls with and girls without, boys with and boys without. So instead of having four headings with repeated words, you can just have a double-decked heading where everything that is marked with the line above these headings belongs to the same category. And here the same. Okay? The very first column shows some information about the variables, some indexing or some categories of the variables or the variables themselves. So they are not the numeric information you want to show, they are titles. of the information that you want to show. This very first column is called stub. Okay, it's the stub column. Now, when you are appending one table above the other because the information shares the same headings, which is the case here with wave 1 and wave 2, they all are about girls with, girls without, boys with, and boys without, then you don't need to repeat the headings. Also because each table only has one set of heading lines, so you can't have new heading lines below. This is called spanner, okay? So in that case, you have one spanner here, and then the totals are marked by um, lines above and below, and then you have another spanner and more information respective to the same titles and the heading lines, and then the totals below again, okay? Right, let's just move on. Okay, let's just open parentheses here and talk about vertical lines. So there is a very old fight between APA and vertical lines. They don't really go along. Okay, APA, vertical lines, not best friends. APA has personal issues with vertical lines. If APA sees vertical lines walking down the street, it will throw a banana peel on the way for the vertical lines to step on it and slip. That's not exactly true. In situations where you really, really, really need vertical lines, you are going to use vertical lines, but you must really need them. And you actually almost never really need them. This usually can only happen if you are trying to separate horizontal information because you are appending horizontally um, information that should maybe go to different tables. So what you're doing is concatenating tables and then you separate them with a vertical line. But that's, you only use vertical lines when really necessary. Again, there's one place where you really, really never use vertical lines, and that's the two end sides, okay? The end sides, never, never vertical lines. So in practice, you are unlikely to ever need vertical lines, ever. Okay, now let's see some specific guidelines for some types of tables that we are going to be using in this module. So correlations, we are going to be using matrices of correlations, aren't we? So some important information about them in APA style. We have a diagonal of perfect correlation coefficients, don't we? We have a diagonal of correlation coefficients equal uh, which are equal to 1 because it's the same variables being correlated to itself. In APA style, you don't keep the diagonal with the ones, but you also don't just get rid of the diagonal. You show to your reader where the diagonal is, but you replace the ones by M dashes. M dashes are the long dashes that we usually use as some sort of parentheses in text where we want to break the sentence and introduce parenthetical information. So there's a way to put these M dashes in text. So I'm gonna teach you a trick. It's called alt codes. Alt codes can be used in any word editing software. It's not just for Word, it's for anywhere that you're writing. I'm not sure if this applies outside of Windows. I think it's a Windows thing, but it works. If you're using Windows, I'm pretty sure it works anywhere. If you want to know how to put a symbol in text, just Google how to use the alt code. What is the alt code for that symbol? In the case of M dashes, it's alt 0151. All alt codes are done by pressing Alt, the Alt key, and keeping this key pressed while you type 4 numbers. So you can create any symbol by doing that, if you know what the Alt code for that symbol is. Just press Alt, keep Alt pressed, and write 4 numbers while you have Alt pressed. When you release Alt, you're gonna have your symbol. 0151 is the one for M dashes. Another important thing about correlation matrices. Correlation matrices always have the same variables in the stub column. We've seen that that's the leftmost column, and in the headings, right? It's the same set of variables being intercorrelated. So the APA style to do that is to not repeat the name of the variables that you have in your stub column in the headings. In the stub column, you number the variables and you give the names. So the names of the variables are there, but they're numbered. And then in the headings, you only have the numbers of the variables. You do not repeat the names. Okay? Right. In our coursework, we're only dealing with one sample. So where we have a diagonal, we are going to have mirrored information at either side of the diagonal. Because the information is going to be exactly the same, you're going to have to choose one of the triangles to keep. That's usually the lower triangle. And you're going to delete all the information in the other triangle. That's usually going to be the upper or right triangle. That's going to be all blank because it's the same information as you have in one of the sides of the diagonal. Now, sometimes you're doing analyses that involve correlation matrices for more than one sample. If you're running the exact same analyses for 2 different samples, and both of them are going to have the same matrix of correlations, then you can present both samples in one table. So you can just present one table showing the matrix of correlations, and one of your samples is going to be below the diagonal. The other sample is going to be above the diagonal. You're going to explain which group is which on the note. So you're going to have a note below your table, and you're going to let your reader know what group is represented below the diagonal and what group is represented above the diagonal. But we are not doing that in this coursework here. So that's just information for you to know if you ever need it in the future. Now, let's see guidelines for when we are doing factor analysis. When we show the pattern matrix after rotation, we need to specify what is the rotation type that we have used. In our coursework, we are using direct Oberlin delta equals 0. So Oberlin needs to be stated in your table. Factor coefficients or loadings above a prescribed threshold. In our case, the threshold we are using is 0.3. These are indicated in bold. And in your general note below the table, you're going to explain what is the threshold that above which you are indicating in bold. So the other factor loadings are not erased in APA style 7th edition. They're kept in the table. All of the factor coefficients or factor loadings are all going to be there. You just indicate the ones above your threshold using bold, right? That's how we identify which items are loaded into which factors. It might intuitively seem easier to spot this by erasing the factor loadings below the threshold. So you can see exactly that these are the only items loading that much to that factor. But in APA, we don't do that. We keep all of them in there and just mark in bold if they are above the threshold. right? So as I said, we don't delete the other coefficients or loadings. We simply differentiate them by using bold. In ANOVAs, if we do just a one-way ANOVA, we do not need to show the table. We can simply write in the text that F with this and this degree of freedom, so you have the numerator degrees of freedom and the denominator degrees of freedom, is equal to whatever the value of the F ratio is, and then you give the p-value. You don't need anything else. You don't need the ANOVA table. You can just have the relevant information in the text. But if you're running multiple ANOVAs, then you might as well. I mean, that's where tables come from, isn't it? It's repeated systematic uh, information that follows the same repeated system. So if you have many analyses, obviously it's easier to show them in a table. In that case, be aware that identical information, if you have the same identical information across all the rows in a given column, you don't keep that information in. This column, with the same information repeated over and over across all rows, is not adding any useful information. If you can simply have a note specifying that that is the information across all rows, right? So one thing that SPSS, for example, usually gives us is N, is the number of people. If across all of your rows you have the same number of people, for some reason the analysis that you've done used the same number of people and none of them did anything different to that number of people, then you don't need to keep repeating that information in. You just place a note saying that that's how many people you used across all of these analyses. Also, ANOVA tables show us the sums of squares and the mean squares. These are usually not required for publishing purposes. Now I'm going to show you one example just to start, before we start focusing on the types of analyses you actually have to do for this coursework. To begin with, I'm going to show just an example. So I'm going to show you an example of how to do a contingency table. So I created this fake data set. In this fake data set, we have we have five qualitative variables. Whether the qualitative variables are nominal or ordinal, it doesn't matter. As long as they have categories, we can construct a contingency table. So a contingency table takes the counts of one variable per category and the counts of the categories of the other variable, and it cross-tabulates both of them to see in each cell how many occurrences. In psychology, we usually are talking about people, how many people are in each intersection of the categories of one variable with the categories of another variable. I think that's a good example for us to start constructing a table in APA style. Usually when we have contingencies tables, we can also measure associations. So we can see if the levels of one variable depend on the levels of another variable in terms of frequency of occurrence. Okay, so we have these absolute frequencies. From absolute frequencies, we can divide them by a total and get a relative frequency regarding what total we want. It can be the columns, it can be the rows, or it can be the total sample. So there are three possibilities. We're going to see these three possibilities. And these measures of association, such as chi-square, the Pearson's chi-square test, or another example is Fisher's exact test. These tests test the null hypothesis that there is no association. So the data are independent. The two variables are independent. Occurrences in the categories of one variable have no dependency, do not depend on occurrences in the categories of the other variable. If we reject this null hypothesis, then we have a significant association. Okay, so they're not independent. With the scale variables, with the variables that are numeric, we can do other tables, okay? We can have summary statistics, we can have matrices of correlation, such as what we are gonna do in the actual coursework. So we can go to descriptive statistics and go to crosstabs, or we can go to table, in here tables, and go to custom tables. Both are gonna work. So let's just go to descriptive statistics and crosstabs. Right. So we want to see diagnosis and belief in fake news. We can run an exact test. We can run a chi-square to see if there is an association or not. We can have our percentages taken the totals from the rows or from the columns or from the whole sample. If I click the three of them, it's going to be too confusing. There are going to be way too many percentages going on. It's going to be hard to see. If we click APA style table, this doesn't mean we're going to get a table in APA format. It's going to be far from APA format. But it's going to give us the totals based on columns. I didn't see anything regarding that in the actual APA publication manual. So I'm not sure why SPSS is doing that. I think having totals based on columns or rows or total or the total sample to base your percentages from is an option that you have as a researcher to make based on what you're trying to see in there. Let's start with totals, then I'm gonna show you how this can be different. So continue, let's press OK. I also asked for a figure. We are not looking at figures in this session, but it's a good way to see the associations that go on. If we were talking about figures, I could also show what you can do regarding figures, but this is about tables, okay? So this um, the shade here cannot happen in APA. You only shade cells when you really need. It's the same as vertical lines, only when you really need them. Right, so we have the totals from the 50 people being 100%. So when we look at 34% here, we're looking at 34% of these 50 people who are both typical and do not believe in fake news. When we look at this for 14% here, we notice that 14% of the whole sample of 50 people are both anxious and do believe in fake news. All right. So by choosing the total sample as the source of the totals to get the percentages from, each cell represents the intersection of both variables. Right. Now, how can we put that in Word and do APA style? We are prompted to just simply copy, right, the table and place it in Word. Where's Word here? So let me just delete everything. If we do that, well, we can keep the source formatting, which we don't want. We're exactly trying to change the source formatting. We could merge formatting, and if you are taking an APA style template from, for example, from apastyle.apa.org, they have some templates in there. You might consider merging the formatting and tweak whatever you need, but in this document, we don't have any formatting already going on in the document to merge with. So here we might as well just keep the source formatting and work from that. We don't want a picture because we cannot edit the picture, and we don't want to keep text only because that's going to get rid of the cells, so we are not going to have the borders to work with. So we might just paste it here. Now, I'm going to show you that that's actually not a good idea at all to just copy and paste from SPSS. Why is that? Well, let's take a look at the grid lines. So if we select the table and go to table design, in borders, we go to borders and we can see that we can view the grid lines. So that shows us all of the cells in a table, regardless of what borders are actually showing a line or not. We can see that SPSS gives us a table with some funky things going on. So we have some, we have these three columns with no separation in columns in here. This is going to be complicated to edit because we want to get rid of these many columns. We just want to show fake beliefs up here, and yes or no, that's all. We don't want to have counts and percentages. So for us to edit all of that in here, that's going to be a little bit complicated. So what we can do is after pasting the table in here, we use it as a source of information, but we create a new table. So we can go to Insert and Table. Now, how many cells do we need? Well, in this example, we can just count. But we are not going to use these lines here, these rows with the percentages, because our percentages are going to go in the same cells as the absolute frequencies. So we are going to get rid of these. We are not going to count them to create our table. And we don't need that many columns. We just need one column for fake beliefs here, okay? We also don't need the title to be in the table. We want a title with a double spacing, don't we? So we want to write that outside of the table so we can properly have a double spacing. Um, right, and so this one's going to be only one column. So let's count. That's one, two, oops. So one here, then two, three, four, five, six columns. And how many lines? One, two, we need the two lines here for the double-decked heading. One, two, three, four, five. Okay, so it's a 6 by 5. No, it's actually a 5, but yeah, 6 by 5. But not in the table, outside of the table. So again, insert table 6 by 5. Right. So we know we're going to need 2 rows for the double-decked headings, but we are not going to need 2 rows here and here. So for us to have the same number of the same space going on for the whole headings, we're going to merge these two here, merge cells, and merge these two here, merge cells. All right. Here we are going to have absolute frequency, or it could be count as well, of belief in fake news, right? We're going to merge all of this because this is the above deck, and that's the same information for all of these below deck headings. It's absolute frequency of fake diagnoses, okay? And a total. Here, what are the fake diagnoses? We have typical, we have depressive, we have anxious, we have schizophrenia. Um, yes and no. Let's just follow the same order so we don't confuse ourselves. And total. Okay, the rest is the information in the cells in the body of the table. So let's just copy from above. It's 17 people and 34%. Now, instead of repeating the symbol percent in all of these cells, we can just place them in here and say, well, it's percent for everybody when we are inside the brackets, right? Percent from the total sample, or from n equals 50. This n needs to be in italics, and there's always one space below and one space after the equal sign in APA format, okay? So now, because this is in the brackets, we know that these brackets are talking about percentages, right? 2 is 4%. We have 50 people, so everything's just going to be the double to make the percentage. 2, 4%, 7, 14%, These 34% people, are these 34% typical people who do believe in fake news or not, who don't believe in fake news? No, it's not 34% out of typical people, because here 48% of the whole sample is typical. Out of these 48%, 34 are typical and do not believe in fake news. 14% are typical and do believe in fake news. So these percentages come from this 100%, which is the 50 people. Okay, so these are the intersections between the two variables. 34% are people who are both typical and do not believe in fake news. 4% are people who are both anxious and do not believe in fake news. These percentages being the exact intersection, it's because we used the total number of people as our source of the percentages, okay? Now, the totals we were just copying, so that's just the same. 56% out of the total 50 people are people who don't believe in fake news. 44% of the sample believes in fake news. 48% of the sample are people who are typical. 12% are depressive people. 9 are anxious. And 9 as an absolute count, but 18% and 11 people, that is 22% of the whole sample, are people with schizophrenia. 50 people in total, that's our 100%. Okay, let's right-click the table after we select it. And let's go to table properties. There's an option here if we go to cell of having everything centered from top to bottom, so from up down, centered from up down. Because we can simply go to text here and go to centered to have it centered horizontally, but we also want it centered vertically. And to do that, we right click, we go to table properties, cell, and we select center. Okay. Now, do we want all of these lines to be marked? We want all borders marked with lines? No, we do not. So the first thing we want to do, because we require such a few number of lines that we actually want to print, what we are going to do is, let's go to table, borders, and let's get rid of all borders. By doing that, it might be difficult to see what we are doing, right? Because we don't have any borders. So one way to help us while we don't have the borders is to go to View Grid Lines. We go to View Grid Lines in the Borders option. So we click View Grid Lines. This wouldn't be printed. This is just for us to see what we are doing, okay? Now, what are the lines we do want to see printed? We want the top line. So we're going to go to Table Borders and we want the top line. We're going to go to bottom and we want the bottom line. These are mandatory. And we want to separate the headings from the rest of the text by having a line below the headings above the first row in the body of the table, okay? Do we separate these columns based on vertical lines? No, we never use vertical lines. But we can separate the last row using a top border here, because that's the row with the totals. So we can have a top row in here. Fonts. APA accepts some fonts, and depending on the font, you're going to have a different size. Calibri 11 is fine, that is APA style, but we also can have times size 12 if it's times the default size is 12. And we can also have Lucida Sans Unicode. And if that's the font we're using, the size is going to be 10. Okay. Now we need the table number. Again, you're gonna number it according to callout order, and you are better off doing that at the end. This needs to be in bold. Then the line space in here has to be double. And here in italics, you're gonna write the name of the table. So that's gonna be, for example, fake belief in fake. Let's just italicize it here. Just to have a full stop in the title. This here has to be double spaced as we have done. What about the table itself? The cells don't need to be double spaced. They can be 1.5 spaced or simple spaced. But these are the only three options. We can't have 2.5 or 1.15. We don't have these options. It's either 1, 1.5, 1.5, or 2. Let's keep 1. We can also have a note. The note has to follow the same standard. If we decide for a font, we have to follow the font across the whole document as our default. In our note, general note for the whole table, we can say that percentages reflect the whole sample. Our percentages were taken from the whole sample. Or based on, maybe that's better, we're based on the whole sample. You're saying the same thing as you say it in here, but that's just an example. So this is one possible table in AP. Oh, no, sorry, there's one thing that was missing. The double-decker heading needs to be separated by a line as well. So we go to table, we go to borders, we go to top border. Sorry. We'll go to top border in here. Because we need to know what the below deck headings refer to. So we know that by having the line. So we know that all of these below deck categories are under this category above the deck. Okay. Now, one thing looks a bit weird here. We're using 4 lines here, so this looks too tall. So what we can do is use less space. So we can just use only as much space as we need by double clicking. If we go to where the border is and we double click, we only use as much space as we want. Right, so now that we shortened the spaces here to only fit the amount of space we do require, what we can do here is double click this one. And by double clicking this one, we are using we're reshaping the space so we can have just one line here, okay? Now that was a little too much. This one line is not going to help because we're using 2 lines here for the double decker anyway. So we are going to try to make it a little less weird. So again, we're going to double click here. Right, that's our table right there. This is a table in APA style. Now, these percentages were based on the total sample of 50 people. But I said before that there are other ways to do that. Let's just see that so you don't feel confused. Let's go to Analyze and cross tabs again, but here in cells, we are gonna choose columns, okay? And see how that's going to look like. So let's delete the first analysis, cut, just so we get rid of it. Right, and here we have this table. So it's supposed to be something similar to this. The absolute counts are the same, the absolute frequencies. So it's 17, 7, 2, 4, 2, 7, 7, 4. Same thing. But the frequencies are different, aren't they? How come we have 70% here and 29% here? Well, that's because the 100% now is in the column, okay? So what we are looking now in here is out of everybody who is typical, 70% of them do not believe in fake news. 29% of them do believe in fake news. Out of everybody who is depressive, 33% don't believe in fake news and 66% believe in fake news. Out of everybody who is anxious, 22% don't, 77% do. Out of the total number of people who are with schizophrenia, 63% do not believe in fake news and 36% do believe in fake news. Okay, so that's if we're focusing on using these categories of fake diagnoses as our totals, but we want to see from out of each of these categories how many people do or don't believe in fake news. We could do the opposite. We could go here to analyze descriptive statistics, crosstabs, and cells, and instead of columns, we want the rows. So, okay, out of the total people who don't believe in fake news, 60% are typical, 7.1 are depressive, 7.1 are anxious, 25% are schizophrenic. Out of the 100% people who do believe in fake news, 31% are typical, 18% have depression, 31% anxiety, 18% schizophrenia. Okay, again, everything that I'm doing here is just as an example. This is all fake information. I am not trying to imply absolutely anything in here. It's just examples. All right, but that's another way you could do your table depending on what your objectives are. These are the Pearson's correlation coefficients, the p-value for whether or not they are equal to 0. Insert. So how many cells do we need? We insert table 5 by 5. So if we state the unit of measurement in here, we don't need to repeat it across the board. So income is in dollars, isn't it? So instead of repeating the dollar sign on every cell, we are stating it here so we know that it's dollar across the board, it's hours across the board, and so on. In APA, we don't need to specify what SD is. If we had something different here, some different acronym, we would need some explanation. For example, instead of having two columns, we can just have mean and standard deviation in one. Delete the whole column, centralizing in the paragraph, but also we right click, go to table properties, go to cell, go to center, click OK. So we go to no border, but we can't see anything. So to help us, meanwhile, we keep the grid lines. We need the top border. We need the bottom border. And to separate the headings, we need the bottom border. Unselect grid lines. Now, the 7th edition of the publication manual of APA doesn't require you to differentiate the thickness of the top line and the bottom line. But traditionally, what people usually do is they get a thicker border, say like this, for the very top and the very bottom borders. Okay? If you have a very big table, you might consider doing that. It's not wrong, but it's not required by APA 7th edition. We double click this one here and we double click, let's call it table 2. Let's give it a name. This one is italics, this one is bold. These have to be double spaced. Now, correlations matrix. So we are not going to repeat the names of the variables in here. We're going to number them in here and just put the numbers up there. If we click Ctrl plus Z when Word does that, we get rid of this extra space that we don't need. So just a Ctrl Z. Now, why are we not keeping these many lines? Because we just need the Pearson correlation coefficient. The p-value, we're going to use asterisks instead of reporting the exact p-values, just so we have a less crowded table. And the ands are not adding anything because we don't have any missing data, so everybody's 50 anyway. So we're just gonna put a note saying all correlations are based on 50 people. This is in italics. This is in italics. 1, 2, 3, 4. 0151. Alt 0151. We are not going to put anything up in here because we only have one sample. This one sample is going to go down in here. Pearson's coefficient correlation, the point estimate of it is 0.21. This A, we can simply go to font and change the A to a font called symbol. If we do that, that A becomes an alpha, right? Or more appropriately, we go to Insert, Symbols, Symbol, and I have alpha here, but if you don't, because these are the recently used ones, you go to More Symbols, and once it opens, you go to Subset, and we choose Greek, because we're looking for a Greek letter, right? But if we were looking for a mathematical symbol, we have mathematical operators. If we were looking for arrows, we have arrows. If small letter alpha, that looks like what we want. Insert and close. So we have alpha in here. In APA, we don't italicize the Greek letters. Technically, we shouldn't just use a regular hyphen here. We should go to symbols and mathematical operators. Mathematical operators and find the minus sign. So this is called a minus sign and click insert, close. A minus sign is not exactly the same as a hyphen. See, this is a hyphen, this is a minus sign, they are different. So that's an asterisk without superscript. I am selecting it and going to Home, Font, and go to here in superscript. The shortcut is Control plus Shift plus the plus sign for a superscript. But you can click here in Word and you can have your superscript asterisk, which is required by APA. You have to break a line to put the probability note. You put the asterisk, and with no spaces, you write P, and this P goes with italics, smaller than 0.05. So this asterisk is not superscript. It's going to be superscript now. Okay. Then you have the another. You still need to fix the lines. So let's first go to table design, get rid of all the borders, keep grid lines at the bottom. Now use the regular line. We want the top. We want the headings to have a separation. We unselect grid lines. We still need a title, so table 3, for example, if that's the case, and matrix. So these two are double spaced. This is bold. This is italics. And the whole thing needs to be either times 12, which is the case that's right, or Lucida 10, or other options that APA gives you. Now, a way to complete this example is to combine the two tables because we're talking about the same 4 variables. So we can extend here. For example, we can extend this one with 1, 2, 3, 4 more columns. Go to layout and orientation landscape. And I'm going to copy these and paste them in here. So I'll just keep one and paste. Right, and now I'll rotation landscape so we can see it better. We don't need this one. The numbers that I have in here, I need them in here. And it's not the same order, so we're gonna put them in the same order. Now we're gonna put these in the table we already had. We're gonna put them in the right order so they suit the order that is in here. So the fonts are different. This is Lucida Sans Unicode 10. This is Times New Roman 12. Both are correct according to APA, but we cannot have both at the same time. We have to have consistency in our font